Here we keep you entertained by our folk tales and true life stories. Please subscribe to our channel as it means the world to us. Also, please like, share, and comment on this channel for more exclusive contents. Now sit back and relax as we take you through the most wonderful epistle. The echo of clippers and soft jazz in the background always soothed Sophia Blake, a 27-year-old stylist who had long buried her dreams in silence and duty. Raised in a modest two-bedroom apartment in Queens, New York, by her single mother, Lillian, Sophia understood from a young age that luxury wasn't always wrapped in ribbons, it was often stitched into resilience. Her mother worked the graveyard shift as a nurse for over 20 years, often coming home with blistered heels and bloodshot eyes, but never a complaint. Sophia's childhood was not defined by toys or sleepovers but by responsibility, helping with laundry at 6, learning to cook by 8, and braiding Lillian's hair while listening to her stories of courage and heartbreak. In those moments, Sophia discovered her love for beauty, not vanity, but transformation. From watching women walk into salons carrying burdens and walk out glowing, she knew her dream wasn't just to style hair, it was to create a sanctuary. A place where pain could quietly evolve into confidence. Sophia's dreams had no shortcuts. She worked her way up from shampoo girl at a local salon to senior stylist at the high-end Velvet Glow salon, known for its upscale clientele and impossible standards. Her vision of owning her own exclusive salon, where elegance, privacy, and style met in perfect harmony, was something she guarded like a sacred secret. She often journaled about it during her lunch breaks, drawing floor plans and mood boards, even if her savings barely scratched the surface of what such a venture demanded. Her personal life had always taken a backseat to her ambition, and trust didn't come easy after a humiliating breakup 4 years earlier with a man who left her the moment he got promoted, claiming she didn't fit into the circles he now frequented. Sophia had vowed never to shrink herself again for love, yet life, with its unpredictable hands, was about to challenge that promise. And it all began on a chilly November morning during a community charity event for domestic abuse survivors, where fate staged its quiet ambush. Ethan Blake stood out that day, not because of his tailored coat or the soft leather gloves he never removed, but because he didn't blend in like the other corporate faces that simply donated for tax relief. At 32, Ethan was magnetic in an understated way, with the calculated charm of someone raised in privilege but hardened by ambition. He was there representing his firm's philanthropic division, scanning the room with disinterest until his eyes locked on Sophia, who was volunteering at the makeup booth, gently dabbing concealer on a survivor's bruised cheek with both elegance and empathy. It wasn't a movie-like moment, there were no gasps or background music, but it made him pause long enough to forget his rehearsed speech. He approached her under the guise of donation logistics, but something in Sophia's direct gaze disarmed him. She didn't fawn. She didn't care about his title. She spoke to him like a human being. And as the night ended and snowflakes began to fall outside the community center, Ethan offered her a ride home. Sophia declined. But the spark had been lit, and neither of them knew then that this simple, unassuming interaction would set off a chain of events that would destroy illusions, test character, and ultimately change lives forever. Ethan Blake had grown up in a Manhattan penthouse that smelled of mahogany, imported cigars, and cold ambition. Born into one of the city's most influential real estate families, his childhood was filled with dinner parties instead of bedtime stories, Latin tutors instead of Lego bricks. His mother, Diana Blake, ran the family empire with an iron will disguised in pearl necklaces and red-bottom heels. A perfectionist who equated success with obedience, Diana expected Ethan to follow in the family's footsteps without question. His father, Robert, though gentler in tone, was largely absent, emotionally and physically. Their marriage had long dissolved into appearances. Despite being surrounded by everything material a child could want, Ethan often found himself standing in his expansive bedroom window at night, staring down at the tiny glowing apartments below, wondering what normal felt like. As the firstborn, he carried the weight of legacy on his shoulders, but his heart always sought something less polished, something real. The one person who managed to break through the cold walls of their home was his younger sister, Isabelle. 5 years his junior, she was the complete opposite of Diana, free-spirited, empathetic, and stubbornly kind. Isabelle often snuck into Ethan's room during their teenage years to read mystery novels or complain about another failed etiquette lesson. When Ethan left for Columbia University, their bond only deepened over long phone calls, especially when Isabelle refused to work in real estate and instead pursued nonprofit environmental law, much to their mother's horror. Diana often belittled Isabelle's choices, calling them delusions, but Ethan admired his sister's courage. Still, Ethan couldn't afford to rebel. His position as heir made him responsible for preserving the family's pristine public image, and this pressure carved a ruthless edge into him. Though not cruel by nature, Ethan learned to hide his vulnerability beneath strategic charm, and to navigate boardrooms like battlefields. But in doing so, he slowly began losing the parts of himself that once longed for warmth, intimacy, and depth. Amid the glitz of social galas and networking luncheons, Ethan's friendships were few but loyal. The one exception was Lucas Evans, his childhood best friend turned tech millionaire, who preferred sneakers over brogues and sarcasm over boardroom formalities. Lucas had grown up middle class and never let wealth change his sense of authenticity. He often joked that Ethan needed a vacation from his mother more than from work. It was Lucas who always reminded him not to confuse ambition with fulfillment. Ethan's past romantic relationships, mostly with women from elite families, had been more political alliances than love stories. He had grown tired of rehearsed laughs and designer affection. Then came Sophia, a woman so grounded in herself that she made silence feel like music. Ethan didn't know it yet, but the desire she stirred in him wasn't just romantic. It was a deep yearning to rediscover the man he once thought he could never be. By the time Sophia turned 24, her hands had become both tools and testimony, tools of precision in styling hair, and testimony to the life she'd wrestled with grit and grace. At Velvet Glow Salon, she'd risen from assistant to senior stylist in 4 short years, not because she was favored, but because she was tireless. The upscale salon, located in Midtown Manhattan, catered to socialites, CEOs' wives, and influencers who judged with their eyes before they spoke with their mouths. Sophia's ability to blend elegance with subtle creativity made her a favorite among clients who once refused to sit in her chair because of her youth and race. She didn't just do hair, she read moods, absorbed unspoken pain, and gave confidence disguised as curls. Still, behind every perfect blowout was a woman who sometimes ate lunch in the storage room to avoid hearing another coworker brag about luxury vacations or diamond anniversaries. Every time she swept a floor or folded towels, she reminded herself, this wasn't her destination. This was her proving ground. Sophia's anchor in the storm of superficiality was Maya Thompson, her coworker and best friend. Maya was bold where Sophia was measured, her voice always a few decibels louder, her outfits a rebellion against any salon uniform. Born in Harlem and raised by her jazz musician grandfather, Maya had a fire that refused to be dimmed, and she often became Sophia's mirror when doubt crept in. The two bonded over late-night wine sessions, swapping stories of childhood, ambition, and broken hearts. Sophia had once confided in Maya about Liam, the ex who ghosted her after promising forever, only to post engagement photos with a wealthier woman a month later. It had shattered her trust and left her questioning her worth. Maya hadn't offered pity, she had offered a plan. We don't cry over boys, sophomore. We level up so high they need binoculars to see us. From then on, Sophia's dream of owning an exclusive salon wasn't just a fantasy, it became her fuel. Her mood board hung behind her apartment door, silently reminding her every morning, this was personal. Hair wasn't Sophia's only skill, it was her language. Each strand, color match, and contour was an extension of how she translated pain into beauty. Clients often shared their secrets in hushed tones beneath the hum of hairdryers, divorces, miscarriages, affairs, disappointments. Sophia listened. She rarely judged. And in those quiet spaces, she learned more about the fragility of life and the hidden wounds people carried. Ironically, while she could spot others' insecurities in a second, she couldn't always confront her own. Her apartment was humble, tucked above a dry cleaner in Astoria, but she'd painted every corner herself and thrifted every piece of furniture with intention. She dreamed of floors made of white marble, mirrors framed in gold, and chairs where women like her could feel expensive, even if life had told them they weren't. But she knew dreams alone weren't enough. She needed capital, a business plan, and, though she hated to admit it, emotional support. And in that season of silent yearning, she had no idea that fate had already positioned someone in her path who would alter everything, both for better and for worse. It was supposed to be just another corporate grooming session at Velvet Glow, a monthly partnership the salon had with Ethan Blake's company to give elite clients and executives a luxury self-care experience. Sophia had heard that some big-name executive would be stopping by that morning, but she had no clue it would be him, the stranger who offered her a ride home that night at the charity gala. When Ethan walked in wearing a navy suit that looked like it was stitched by Italian hands and confidence that didn't try too hard, the room shifted. Sophia was mid-consultation with a client when their eyes locked again, and there it was, that unmistakable flicker of recognition. Ethan didn't wait for introductions. "Didn't think I'd see you again," he said with a smile that danced around sincerity. "Neither did I," Sophia replied, her tone measured but curious. She didn't giggle or blush. And that resistance? It intrigued him more than any woman ever had. Their first real conversation happened over espresso during a break, perched on velvet bar stools near the salon's glass-paneled balcony. Sophia was direct, refreshing, even. She didn't soften her opinions to impress him, and when he made a self-deprecating joke about living in boardrooms, she responded with, "That's sad, not funny." Ethan laughed, genuinely, the kind of laugh that comes from being caught off guard. She didn't seem interested in who he was on paper. For Sophia, titles meant nothing, people's hearts mattered more. Over the next few days, Ethan found reasons to visit the salon more often. A trim here. A facial there. Lucas teased him mercilessly, calling it Operation Get the Girl, but Ethan didn't care. Every minute with Sophia felt like fresh air. Their late-night texts turned into calls. Their conversations dipped into childhood stories and dreams. She shared her vision of owning an exclusive salon, and he confessed that he feared he'd become a version of his mother, emotionless, power-obsessed, and always chasing more. One Friday night, after a spontaneous walk through Central Park under golden street lamps, Ethan stopped beside Bethesda Fountain and asked, "Would you believe me if I said I haven't felt this alive in years?" Sophia looked at him, hesitant but honest. "I'd believe you," she whispered. Their hands brushed, then lingered, then intertwined. It was delicate, vulnerable, nothing like the dramatic love stories in the movies. Ethan didn't rush. In fact, the slower it went, the more serious he felt. But behind the growing intimacy was an invisible fog, a tension Sophia tried to ignore. Maya had already warned her once, men like him come with complications you can't see until they're choking you. Sophia didn't want to believe that. She wanted to believe in something good. Ethan, on the other hand, knew deep down that bringing Sophia into his world would ignite the disapproval of a mother who still believed love was transactional. But he didn't care, at least not yet. It didn't take long for the novelty of Sophia to wear thin on Diana Blake's perfectly manicured patience. When Ethan first mentioned he was dating a hairstylist from Queens, Diana didn't bother hiding her disdain. "There's a difference between a hobby and a pedigree," she'd remarked, swirling her wine at their family's private dinner. But Ethan insisted Sophia join them for a formal dinner at the Blake estate, believing, perhaps naively, that his family would see what he saw. Sophia wore a pale lilac dress that Maya helped her pick out, classy, understated elegance, but when she walked into the marble foyer of the Blake mansion, she felt like an intruder. Diana's greeting was polite but hollow, her smile thinner than the stem of her champagne flute. Over dinner, every question Diana asked was laced with judgment disguised as curiosity. "Do you plan to go back to school? Is this, salon work, your long-term goal?" Ethan tried to intervene, but the atmosphere had already curdled. Robert Blake, Ethan's father, sat mostly silent during the dinner, only occasionally meeting Sophia's eyes with a soft, almost apologetic glance. Unlike his wife, Robert didn't seem to thrive on control. Instead, he exuded a quiet regret, as though he'd made compromises in life he now wished he hadn't. When dessert arrived, chocolate mousse plated like an art exhibit, Diana pushed further. You know, Ethan once dated a woman from Geneva who studied global finance at Stanford. He nearly proposed. You remind me of her. You both have strong personalities. Sophia's fork clinked against her plate. Ethan stood up from his chair, visibly shaken, and walked out to the terrace. Sophia followed moments later, her heart thudding with confusion. I'm sorry, he whispered, looking out over the city skyline. I thought they'd see you for who you are. I was wrong. Sophia didn't cry. She didn't shout. She simply nodded and said, now you know what I deal with every day, being underestimated. But it was more than that. This wasn't just disapproval. It was a warning. A week later, Lillian came to visit. Ethan insisted she meet his parents, perhaps to even the score. Lillian arrived dressed in a cream blouse and black skirt, carrying homemade lemon bars wrapped in foil and hope. The moment Diana saw the foil, her lips twitched in quiet horror. The visit was short-lived. Diana offered stiff conversation, Robert remained muted, and Lillian, always perceptive, quickly sensed the hostility masked behind etiquette. As they left, she told Sophia, that woman doesn't dislike you because of who you are. She hates you for what you remind her she's not, kind. Sophia couldn't shake the weight of it. That night, Ethan sat with her on the edge of her bed, rubbing the back of her hand. I don't care what they think, he said. Then don't just say it. Show me, she replied. From the corner of the room, Maya, who had dropped by with wine and sarcasm, simply raised her glass. Buckle up, sophomore. You're not marrying a man. You're marrying a legacy. And in that moment, Sophia realized she was stepping into a life far more complex than she ever imagined. The proposal was cinematic, rooftop restaurant, string quartet, and a skyline that twinkled like it had been choreographed for the occasion. Sophia had just finished laughing at one of Ethan's terrible jokes when he suddenly stood, reached into his blazer, and dropped to one knee. Her heart stopped. Sophia Elise Carter, he said, using her full name like a vow, you've made me feel seen in ways I didn't know I needed. Will you marry me? The ring was exquisite, an oval-cut diamond with a platinum band, but Sophia barely looked at it. Her eyes were locked on his, searching for sincerity. And it was there, clear as day. Around them, people clapped, cameras flashed, but for a moment, it was just her and Ethan, and the surreal weight of a decision that could either be her greatest blessing or her biggest mistake. She said yes, but not with the giddy scream people expected. It was quiet. Thoughtful. Almost wary. She smiled, but inside, a seed of doubt had just been planted. That night, alone in her apartment, Sophia stared at the ring under lamplight. It sparkled like the life she'd imagined, but she couldn't shake the voices in her head. Maya had immediately shouted with excitement, hugging her while also warning, just promise me you won't disappear into their world, sophomore. Lillian had been more reserved. She congratulated her daughter, but her tone held hesitation. Love is beautiful, she said, but it shouldn't cost you your voice. Even Isabelle, who called moments after the news broke, seemed happy, genuinely so, but whispered, brace yourself. Mom won't take this lightly. Sophia tried to reason with herself. Ethan loved her. He had chosen her in front of everyone. But would he continue choosing her when the glamour faded? Would he stand up to Diana every time the criticism came? More importantly, would Sophia be allowed to grow into her dream while living under a name that carried a generational weight? Questions filled her chest like fog. The fairy tale had begun, but she wasn't sure she believed in happily ever afters, not yet. Despite the quiet storm inside her, Sophia moved forward with the engagement. Invitations were drafted. A venue was booked. Ethan's world moved quickly, too quickly, but she kept pace, telling herself this was what love looked like at the top. Isabelle stepped in as a bridge, attending dress fittings with Sophia and offering ideas that didn't feel suffocating. Lucas hosted a rooftop party to celebrate the engagement, where he made a speech subtly aimed at Ethan. True love isn't proven in the sparkle of a diamond. It's tested in the shadows of disappointment. Ethan laughed, but Sophia didn't miss the way his jaw clenched. Beneath the excitement, tension brewed, decisions were being made without her input, and Diana's presence was becoming more aggressive. The wedding planner Diana hired constantly corrected Sophia's preferences. When Sophia finally pushed back about the floral arrangements, Ethan responded with, "Babe, don't stress. Let my mother handle it. She knows what she's doing." In that moment, Sophia realized something chilling. She was engaged to a man she loved, but she was marrying a machine built to erase her. The wedding looked like something out of a bridal magazine, floor-to-ceiling floral arches, a string quartet serenading guests beneath a glass-ceilinged atrium, and champagne that flowed like golden rivers. The luxury hotel ballroom had been transformed into a cathedral of perfection, but Sophia felt like a guest at someone else's fairy tale. From the moment she stepped into her custom gown, a satin, off-the-shoulder piece she had reluctantly approved after Diana rejected her preferred design, everything felt rehearsed, choreographed. Lillian, though visibly emotional, kept a polite distance from the Blake family, her dignity intact but bruised by the subtle condescension she endured throughout the rehearsal week. Isabelle tried her best to keep Sophia smiling, adjusting her veil, whispering jokes, and even sneaking her a flask during the makeup session. But Maya had gone silent. Watching from the second row in a crimson jumpsuit, arms folded, she wore her doubt like armor. She knew her best friend was beautiful, but she also knew she wasn't happy. Diana never once smiled genuinely during the ceremony, though she did applaud at the vows with a measured grace that could have won an Oscar. Robert kept mostly to himself, standing stiff beside his wife, avoiding any meaningful eye contact with Sophia or Lillian. Ethan, however, looked every bit the groom of dreams, his voice steady as he recited his vows, his hands trembling only slightly as he placed the ring on Sophia's finger. "I promise to stand beside you," he said, "not above you." The words made Sophia blink twice, unsure if it was a slip or a truth too fragile to hold. Lucas gave a heartfelt speech during the reception, focusing more on Sophia than Ethan. "She's the kind of woman who turns mirrors into windows," he said, raising his glass. "To a bride who doesn't just belong in this room, she outshines it." The applause was thunderous, but Diana's eyes narrowed just slightly, catching the meaning beneath the praise. And in that tension, a quiet war had already begun, one Sophia didn't yet have the language for. Later that night, as guests danced and laughed beneath chandeliers, Sophia found herself on the balcony overlooking the city. The wind tugged gently at her veil, and she stood alone, wine glass in hand, as the weight of what had happened settled. She was now Sophia Blake, but would she still be Sophia? Ethan joined her moments later, wrapping his arms around her waist. "We did it," he whispered. "We're unstoppable." She smiled for his sake but didn't respond. Her thoughts drifted not to honeymoon destinations, but to her dream, the luxury salon she still longed to build, the business plan gathering dust in her drawer, the name Elysian crown she'd chosen but never registered. In that moment, she realized she had married into power, but her voice, her ambition, her independence, those things were still unclaimed. And while the music played behind them and promises still echoed in her ears, Sophia knew one thing for sure: the real test of this marriage hadn't even begun. Vanessa Reed entered Blake & Fletcher Holdings like a gust of designer-clad turbulence, magnetic, polished, and with ambition masked as charm. Her resume was impeccable: Harvard MBA, multilingual, experience in strategic mergers, and her reputation for winning over boardrooms was already whispered like legend. But what no one at the firm knew, and what Vanessa never disclosed, was that her rise had always been paved with seduction, manipulation, and carefully chosen casualties. Her last relationship had ended with a lawsuit she narrowly escaped and a reputation that forced her to relocate from Miami to New York. She'd grown up the youngest of 4 girls in a family obsessed with status, raised by a socialite mother who taught her how to weaponize femininity. After her affair with a married venture capitalist turned scandalous, Vanessa made a vow: never again would she be second place. If she couldn't marry power, she'd conquer it. And as her eyes settled on Ethan Blake during her first presentation, she saw not a boss, but her next target. It started innocently, if such a word could be used for someone like Vanessa. She complimented Ethan's strategic mind during meetings, offered to stay late for project analysis, and found excuses to bump into him near the executive elevator. Where other women flirted openly, Vanessa calculated her moves like chess. She knew Ethan was newly married, she had studied his wedding photos like a dossier, but she also saw the cracks. He never spoke of his wife during conversations, never wore his ring during internal meetings, and his posture shifted when her name came up, like a man proud but burdened. Vanessa studied these moments, exploiting them slowly. At a company dinner, she faked vulnerability, sharing a fabricated story of a recent breakup that left her questioning her worth. Ethan, raised to be protective and composed, offered kind words, just enough of a crack in the glass. From there, Vanessa began her subtle campaign, leaving notes on his desk, offering curated playlists, memorizing his coffee order, and, most importantly, listening when no one else did. Back home, Sophia noticed the changes like someone sensing an earthquake days before it strikes. Ethan came home later, claimed exhaustion more often, and seemed constantly distracted. When she showed him updated mock-ups for her salon design, her dream resurrected in digital blueprints, he gave a half-hearted "looks nice," and returned to answering texts. Maya, ever perceptive, picked up on the shift the moment she visited the Blake penthouse for dinner. His attentions in another room, she whispered to Sophia in the kitchen, and I don't mean the stock market. But Sophia, clinging to hope, tried to dismiss the sinking feeling. She wanted to believe marriage came with phases, with dips, with busyness. Yet when Ethan mistakenly called her V one night in his sleep, something inside her froze. She didn't know who V was, but she knew, from the way he whispered it like a confession, that whoever she wasn't imaginary. And in that moment, Sophia understood, something dangerous had entered their marriage, and it wore red lipstick and a resume. Ethan had always been ambitious, but lately, that ambition had sharpened into something colder, less about passion, more about desperation. At work, he felt overlooked as promotions passed him by, and instead of reflecting on his performance, he grew bitter, convinced the board no longer saw his leadership as progressive. Vanessa, with her cunning intuition, played perfectly into this growing insecurity. Maybe they don't recognize brilliance until it's gone, she purred during one of their late-night strategy sessions. She offered suggestions that sounded like support but were carefully crafted to diminish Sophia. I don't mean to overstep, but sometimes personal distractions make men lose their edge. Ethan didn't protest. The seed had already been planted. Back at home, he started answering calls in the hallway, erasing messages, and staying up later than usual. He told himself it was work. But deep down, he knew the way his heart raced when Vanessa leaned too close was not about spreadsheets, it was betrayal and incubation. Meanwhile, Sophia's spirit began to fray at the seams. After months of saving, she had found a potential space in Soho, small but with great lighting and proximity to fashion traffic. She showed Ethan the lease options with a hopeful smile, expecting the same man who once encouraged her independence. Instead, his response was cold. We just got married, Sophia. You really think now is the time to gamble on a salon? His words hit her harder than he realized. It wasn't just about the money, it was about how easily he dismissed her vision, how quickly her dreams became categorized as indulgent whims. Sophia tried to explain how much this meant to her, how she'd found vendors willing to work on a tight budget and Maya offering to help with branding. But Ethan had already tuned out. We need to focus on our future, he said sharply, not your fantasy. She nodded, swallowing her hurt, but that night she cried quietly in the shower. For the first time, she began to question whether she had married a partner or a gatekeeper. Their arguments began small, forgotten dates, missed calls, curt replies, but soon they became unpredictable storms. One night, when Sophia asked if Vanessa was the reason he'd grown distant, Ethan exploded. She's a colleague. Don't embarrass yourself. His voice echoed through the apartment like a slap. Sophia stood her ground, but Ethan's defensiveness only deepened her suspicions. Maya noticed the bruises on Sophia's confidence even before Sophia admitted them. It's not always fists, Maya said gently. Sometimes the hits land in your ambition, your dignity, your silence. Sophia started sleeping with her phone under her pillow, tracking her finances more closely, updating her salon business plan in secret. She wasn't preparing for a fight. She was preparing for an exit. Still, some part of her hoped Ethan would come around, that the man she once fell in love with would reemerge. But love, she was beginning to learn, could not survive in a house where your voice had to whisper to be heard. Vanessa knew that time and repetition wore down walls more effectively than brute force. By now, she had studied Ethan well enough to understand how to feed his ego without appearing desperate. She never insulted Sophia directly. Instead, she planted seeds wrapped in concern. "Sometimes, I wonder if your wife understands the pressure you're under," she murmured during a rainy car ride after a late meeting. "It must be hard having to carry both your ambitions and hers." Ethan didn't respond, but the silence was its own agreement. She began curating moments, scheduling urgent meetings at night, brushing her hand over his when handing him reports, arriving at work in perfume she knew he once complimented. She positioned herself as a safe harbor, someone who got him. Meanwhile, she began a subtle smear campaign, suggesting to colleagues that Ethan's judgment had been off since his marriage. She was setting the stage not just for seduction, but for total replacement. Lucas saw the changes immediately. Over drinks one evening, he confronted Ethan with no preamble. "You're losing yourself," he said bluntly. "And don't pretend it's just stress. I've seen this before. You're starting to sound like your mother." The word stung. Ethan defended himself, claiming Vanessa was just a colleague helping him navigate office politics. But Lucas wasn't buying it. "You're playing with fire, man. And Sophia's the one who's going to get burned." That same week, Maya met with Sophia to finalize a revised version of the salon branding. Elysian Crown was now polished, market-ready, and had a waiting list of stylists willing to join if the lease went through. They shared coffee and laughter, but Sophia's eyes had changed. She was hopeful, yes, but wary. "He doesn't see me anymore," she admitted. "It's like he only hears what he wants, and everything else is noise." Maya gripped her hand. "Then make yourself loud enough to shatter the silence. Open that salon. No matter what." The trap snapped a little tighter when Vanessa invited Ethan to an exclusive industry dinner hosted by a venture capital firm known for investing in real estate. "You need to be seen," she said, handing him a designer tie as a gift. "This is your circle now." The invitation was addressed to Ethan and guest, but Vanessa made sure Sophia never saw it. Ethan, distracted and flattered, didn't even think to mention it. At the event, Vanessa introduced him to executives as the future of Blake Holdings, never correcting those who assumed they were a couple. She laughed at his jokes, stood close enough to draw stares, and when photographers snapped photos, she didn't flinch. Meanwhile, Sophia sat at home alone, preparing a pitch deck for her salon, still believing her husband would look at it when he returned. But he came home late and drunk, tossing his jacket on the couch and brushing off her excitement with a slurred, "We'll talk tomorrow." What Sophia didn't know was that tomorrow was already poisoned, and Vanessa had just taken her first real bite. Sophia had always been intuitive. She could sense energy shifts the way a stylist senses the slightest tension in a client's hair. At first, she tried to dismiss the late nights, the faint scent of unfamiliar perfume on Ethan's shirts, the clipped responses when she mentioned the salon. But what truly disturbed her were the emotional absences. Ethan was there, physically, but emotionally. He was drifting further every day. When she asked about the investor dinner, he looked genuinely confused. It was just a boring networking event. "No big deal," he lied, eyes avoiding hers. Maya urged Sophia to dig deeper. "I'm not saying accuse him, sophomore. But something's off. Trust your gut." One evening, while doing laundry, Sophia found a hotel key card in Ethan's jacket, one that didn't match any hotels they'd ever stayed in. Her hands trembled as she tucked it back, choosing, for now, not to confront him. But the silent war in her chest had begun. While Sophia wrestled with suspicion, Vanessa turned the temperature up behind the scenes. She began forging carefully crafted text messages that hinted at Sophia's discontent, sending anonymous tips to HR that Sophia was emotionally unstable, a potential distraction to Ethan's focus. She even went as far as posing as a concerned employee, leaking fabricated emails that made Sophia appear controlling and erratic. When Isabelle noticed Ethan snapping at Sophia during a casual brunch, she took him aside. "What's going on with you? You're different, and not in a good way." Ethan, now entirely ensnared by Vanessa's version of events, defended himself. "Sophia's been impossible lately. She's obsessive about that salon, and it's putting stress on me." Isabelle frowned. "Or maybe you're just believing what you want to believe because it's easier than facing the truth." The tension between siblings deepened, but Isabelle knew something sinister was unfolding. Still, she wasn't close enough to prove it, yet. Sophia, desperate for clarity, turned to Lillian, who invited her to spend the night at her old apartment. Sitting at their tiny kitchen table with 2 mugs of tea, Lillian studied her daughter's face with quiet concern. "You're shrinking again," she said. "That man is supposed to water your dreams, not drain them." Sophia blinked back tears. "I don't know how we got here. I feel like I'm living with a stranger who wears my husband's skin." Lillian reached across and took her hand. "Then it's time to find yourself again, even if he doesn't follow." That night, Sophia made a quiet decision. She would protect her peace, her name, and her dream at all costs. She returned home, stronger but colder. And as Ethan slipped into bed beside her, she didn't turn to kiss him. She stared at the ceiling, heart pounding with resolve. She had loved him deeply, but now, she had to prepare to love herself more. Vanessa had always played the long game, and now she was ready to strike. She had tested Ethan's loyalty, shaped his perception of Sophia, and now it was time to solidify her grip. The fabricated pregnancy was her masterpiece. She approached Ethan on a rainy Monday morning, trembling, with mascara smeared and a tremor in her voice. "I didn't know how to tell you," she whispered, handing him a folded test result and wiping a perfectly timed tear. "I'm pregnant, Ethan." "It's yours." Ethan's face froze, the blood draining from his cheeks. His mind swirled with disbelief, guilt, and a confusing sense of obligation. Vanessa saw the storm and added fuel. "I don't expect anything, I just thought you should know before." "You're blindsided." She knew this would fracture Ethan, rip him between responsibility and image. And it worked. He didn't run, but he also didn't question. That was her victory. Doubt had already poisoned his conscience, and she would use it to destroy everything Sophia represented. Back home, Sophia sensed something had changed, sharply, violently. Ethan became colder, more distant than ever. He barely spoke during dinner, avoided eye contact, and when she asked if he was okay, he muttered, "Don't start." The warmth in his tone had vanished, replaced by a bitterness she didn't recognize. Days later, she overheard him whispering on the phone in the guest room, voice hushed, anxious. Her name was never mentioned, but the shame in his tone haunted her. When she tried to hold him that night, he shrugged her off like a coat. The space between them became a battlefield of silence and resentment. Maya warned Sophia to prepare herself. Whatever's going on, he's in deeper than he realizes. Be ready to lose him. Be ready to win yourself. But Sophia wasn't ready, not yet. Not until the storm made landfall. Still, something told her she needed to begin gathering evidence. Something told her this was no longer about a marriage, it was about survival. The confirmation came not from Ethan's lips but from the tone of his betrayal. One night, while he was asleep, his phone lit up with a message from Vanessa, ultrasound next week. Don't bail again. Sophia stared at the message, 1,000 thoughts crashing into each other. She stood, numb, walked to the kitchen, and sat in the dark. The pain wasn't just from the cheating, it was from the gaslighting, the slow unraveling of truth. But what shook her most was the feeling that this wasn't real. Vanessa didn't strike her as someone who wanted children, she wanted power. Sophia took a photo of the message and forwarded it to her private email, then quietly returned to bed. She didn't speak. She didn't cry. Instead, she plotted. If Vanessa was bold enough to fake a life, then Sophia would be bolder. Her salon plans were no longer dreams, they were an escape route. And she would no longer beg for Ethan to see her worth. She would show him what regret looked like, from the rearview mirror. The phone call came on a quiet Saturday morning, shattering the fragile calm Sophia had been clinging to. Ethan had barely looked at her over breakfast when his phone rang, Vanessa's name flashing across the screen. She picked up in tears, wailing loud enough for Sophia to hear, "It's gone, Ethan. The baby. The stress. I can't." The line went dead, and Ethan's face twisted with panic and rage. "What did you do?" he barked. Sophia looked up, confused. "What are you talking about?" But he was already grabbing his keys, muttering something about her constant harassment. Maya, who had just arrived for brunch, watched him storm out and immediately followed Sophia to the living room. "What did he mean by that?" she asked. Sophia was silent, heart thudding in dread. She didn't know what Vanessa had claimed, but instinct told her this wasn't just about lies anymore, it was about destruction. And Ethan had just chosen a side. The confrontation happened that night at the Blake family estate, where Diana had called a gathering to discuss the scandal already brewing through whispered channels. Lucas, Isabelle, Maya, Lillian, and even Robert had arrived. Sophia walked in last, unsure what to expect, but the atmosphere told her everything: cold stares, hushed tones, and a storm of betrayal hiding behind every polite nod. Ethan stood beside Vanessa, whose eyes were red but dry, arms cradling her stomach like a badge of martyrdom. "She harassed me," Vanessa sobbed. "She sent messages, threatened me, called me names. I begged her to leave me alone, but she kept pushing. And now the baby's gone." Sophia's mouth opened, stunned. "That's a lie," she shouted. "I've never spoken to you directly in my life." But Ethan cut her off, his voice raised. "You cost me my child." And before anyone could react, his hand struck her face with the force of years of growing contempt. The room froze. Maya gasped. Isabelle screamed. Lillian rushed to her daughter, whose cheek was already swelling. Silence fell like a guillotine. Sophia stood trembling, pain radiating across her face, but not just from the slap. It was the pain of betrayal, of dignity ripped away in front of those who once claimed to love her. Blood pounded in her ears as Diana remained silent, eyes narrowing in cold calculation. Robert turned away, ashamed. Lucas stepped forward, eyes ablaze. "What the hell is wrong with you?" he snapped at Ethan. "You don't hit women. You don't hit her." Ethan, breathing hard, suddenly looked at his own hand like it no longer belonged to him. But it was too late. Sophia pulled herself up, looked at everyone, especially Vanessa, and said nothing. She didn't cry. She didn't beg. She turned to Maya and whispered, "Let's go." Lillian followed closely behind, her hand on her daughter's back. As the front doors closed behind them, Sophia felt something break, but it wasn't her spirit. It was her last ounce of hope. And now, all that was left was resolve. This wasn't the end. It was the beginning of her revenge. Vanessa had counted on silence. She believed that Sophia, humiliated and discarded, would disappear quietly, her pain buried beneath shame. But what she failed to consider was that Sophia wasn't broken, she was awakening. And she wasn't alone. While Ethan sulked in guilt and confusion, unsure whether to feel regret or righteousness, Maya and Lucas began asking questions. They started with Vanessa's hospital visit records and quickly noticed something strange: no official entry. No miscarriage. No ER logs. No prenatal history. Maya reached out to an old friend, Dr. Caroline Mendez, who worked at the hospital Vanessa claimed to have visited. Caroline confirmed what they suspected: there had been no patient under Vanessa Reed's name in the last 30 days. If she was here, she used an alias or didn't check in, the doctor said. That was the first crack in the fortress of deceit. And once a crack forms, it never stays small. Lucas and Maya knew they needed proof before confronting Ethan. Meanwhile, back at the Blake estate, Isabelle had become a quiet observer of the growing unease. She noticed how Vanessa no longer pretended to be fragile when no one was watching, how she barked orders at staff and took phone calls that ended with "make sure he doesn't find out." Isabelle, now suspicious, began tailing her conversations and catching strange inconsistencies in her timelines. She overheard Vanessa arguing on the phone one morning. "No, I don't need the ultrasound anymore. Just destroy the copy and make sure it can't be traced." The moment the call ended, Isabelle sent a message to Maya, "We need to talk." "You're not wrong." That same day, Diana overheard a heated exchange between Vanessa and a man who stormed out of the garden. "You promised me shares once you marry him," he growled. Vanessa had replied, "He's almost mine." "Don't blow this now." Diana, hiding behind the hedge, froze. She may have disapproved of Sophia, but deceit of this magnitude was unacceptable. And for the first time, the Queen of Control was no longer in control. Guilt clawed at Ethan like rust on steel. He avoided mirrors now, unable to look at the man who had raised his hand against the one woman who had loved him with nothing but truth. He ignored calls from Lucas and dodged Isabelle's questions. Vanessa, meanwhile, paraded around the office with the smugness of a woman who believed she had won. But when Maya and Lucas handed Ethan the file, photocopies of medical logs, time-stamped surveillance footage from the hospital entrance, and recorded phone calls, his hands trembled. "She was never pregnant," Lucas said flatly. "She lied. And you fell for it. And you hurt the one person who didn't deserve any of this." Ethan's knees buckled as he sat on the edge of his desk. His throat dried, and he whispered, "What have I done?" But the truth was, it wasn't just what he'd done, it was what he hadn't. He hadn't listened. He hadn't believed. And now, the woman he betrayed had turned her back, and she wasn't coming back to save him. Sophia didn't wait for an apology. She didn't wait for justice. She rose before dawn the morning after the incident, stood before her bathroom mirror with a bruised cheek and swollen heart, and whispered, "We start now." With Maya by her side and Lillian's quiet strength in her corner, Sophia signed the lease on the Soho property she'd once only dared to dream about. The space was raw, filled with cracked tiles and dust, but to Sophia it was a blank canvas, one no one could take from her again. They called it Elysian Crown, a name that now meant resurrection. Maya pulled in her contacts for branding, while Isabelle, having cut ties with Vanessa, used her influence to get press coverage under the radar. Even Dr. Caroline offered support, introducing Sophia to upscale dermatologists for partnership. And Sophia, with sleeves rolled and vision sharpened by betrayal, built every inch of her salon not with rage, but with quiet, undeniable grace. The grand opening came 6 weeks later. It wasn't a celebrity-filled spectacle, it was better. It was powerful. The salon glowed with minimalist gold and white tones, ambient lighting, and private client rooms designed for discretion and luxury. Stylists, many of whom had left Velvet Glow to join her, moved like artists, not employees. Clients came in curious, then returned stunned. Word of mouth spread like wildfire. One magazine called it a sanctuary disguised as a salon, and within 2 weeks, Elysian Crown had a 3-month waiting list. Sophia stood at the center of it all, not as the boss, but as the woman who made it all happen. Every detail, every chair, every policy reflected her journey. No gossip, no cruelty, no elitism. Just excellence. And while Ethan's world quietly collapsed beneath the weight of scandal, Sophia's name rose. Not as Ethan Blake's wife. Not as the woman he slapped. But as the woman who refused to stay small. Her name now carried something no Blake legacy could buy, respect earned in silence. Ethan saw it all from a distance. The articles. The reviews. Even his own board members had begun whispering admiration for the salon that came out of nowhere. Vanessa's downfall had only just begun, internal investigations had started, and her charm was wearing thin. But Ethan no longer had the courage to face Sophia. He tried, once, driving to Soho and parking outside Elysian Crown, watching her through the frosted glass doors as she laughed with a client and adjusted a bouquet of orchids. She looked radiant, confident, alive, untouchable. He didn't get out of the car. He couldn't. He realized then that she wasn't just rebuilding her life, she had rewritten the narrative without him in it. And the weight of that truth hit harder than any boardroom failure ever could. The man who once dismissed her dream had become just another bystander to her glow. And that glow, for the first time in her life, came without permission. Without apology. And without him. The unraveling of Ethan Blake didn't come with a single explosion, it came like a slow, merciless bleed. In the weeks following Vanessa's exposure, Blake and Fletcher Holdings began experiencing internal turbulence. Whispers of favoritism, mishandled partnerships, and leaked corporate documents suddenly dominated executive meetings. Investors pulled back. Clients quietly redirected contracts. And though no one said it aloud, Ethan was at the center of it. Lucas, who once helped Ethan land the firm's biggest account, now refused to return his calls. Diana, in a rare moment of calculated survival, distanced herself publicly, insisting Ethan's decisions had been made without board approval. Robert, too passive to defend him, merely disappeared into the shadows of his office. The final blow came during a quarterly shareholders' meeting when the board voted to suspend Ethan pending formal investigation into his role in hiring Vanessa without background clearance. Ethan sat there, pale and shaken, watching the empire his family built slowly excommunicate him, stone by stone, deal by deal. Vanessa, unsurprisingly, vanished. Her resignation came through a lawyer's email, cold and unapologetic. No warning. No farewell. And with her went incriminating files, ghosted clients, and a string of bad press now tied directly to Ethan's name. The media didn't spare him. Headlines labeled him reckless, compromised, and a cautionary tale of nepotism unchecked. The once envied Blake son was now being used in business school lectures as a warning. Alone in his apartment, Ethan wandered from room to room, drowning in silence, replaying every mistake like a looping horror film. The irony wasn't lost on him. He had smacked the one woman who warned him, loved him, believed in him, all to protect the lie of a woman who evaporated the moment she had no use for him. Sophia's voice echoed in his memory, "You don't see me." And it was true. He hadn't seen her. But now, everyone else did, and he could only watch from the outside. Bank accounts froze. Creditors called. Ethan tried to liquidate minor assets to save face, but even that spiraled out of control when the IRS flagged irregularities in Vanessa's company reimbursements filed under his name. He was summoned for questioning, not charged, yet, but his lawyer advised him to prepare for audits. In a cruel twist of poetic justice, the only person who still checked on him was Isabelle, who brought food and sat with him once a week, never speaking of his fall but never pitying him either. "You had a kingdom," she said once, standing near the window. "And you burned it for ashes." Ethan nodded. "And Sophia?" he asked, voice breaking. Isabelle didn't sugarcoat it. "She's thriving." "You lost her." He didn't cry. He didn't beg. He simply stared into the distance, broken in every place that once held pride. And for the first time in his life, Ethan Blake understood what it meant to be completely, irreversibly, alone. Ethan's days were now filled with silence, but not peace, the kind of silence that follows ruin. Each morning, he woke up in a luxury condo that no longer felt like home, the marble countertops and leather furniture mocking him like remnants of a life he no longer owned. The firm had issued an internal memo confirming his indefinite suspension, and his name had been scrubbed from the company website. Job offers stopped coming. Invitations dried up. Former allies ghosted him. It was during one of his sleepless nights that he sat at his dining table, opened his laptop, and began writing a letter, not to save face, not to beg, but to tell the truth. "Sophia," he began, fingers trembling, "I cannot ask you to forgive me, but I owe you the truth I buried under my ego." It was the first time in months he'd used her name without resentment. He saved the letter, unfinished. Not yet brave enough to send it, but brave enough to start. While Ethan grappled with his internal reckoning, Isabelle and Lucas took matters into their own hands. Using their networks, they pushed for a full corporate investigation into Vanessa's forged credentials and backdoor dealings. Lucas tracked down Trent Massey, the same man Diana had overheard in the garden weeks earlier, the former fiancé of Vanessa who'd been used, discarded, and blackmailed. With Lucas and Maya's help, Trent agreed to testify about how Vanessa had used fabricated ultrasound scans and manipulated him with similar tactics. Maya, ever relentless, compiled screenshots, voice recordings, and even financial records showing how Vanessa routed stolen funds into an offshore account. The evidence was overwhelming. A criminal complaint was filed. Investigators were now actively pursuing Vanessa, who was last spotted boarding a private flight under a different alias. She won't go far, Maya told Lucas confidently. Women like her crave power too much to stay hidden for long. The story of Vanessa Reed was now a ticking time bomb, and justice was no longer just an idea, it was inevitable. As the storm of Vanessa's exposure began brewing, Ethan showed up unannounced at Maya's new product launch, dressed plainly, eyes hollow, but purposeful. When Maya saw him, her jaw tightened, and security instinctively moved toward him. But she raised her hand. "Let him speak," she said. Ethan didn't ask for sympathy. He simply handed her a USB drive and said, "Everything I could gather about Vanessa is on here. I don't expect anything in return. Just make sure she answers for what she's done, to all of us." Maya didn't thank him, but she didn't turn him away either. "She's not the only one who has to answer, Ethan," she said quietly. "But at least you're finally trying." Later that night, Maya shared the files with Lucas and Isabelle, and together they began building the final case against Vanessa. Meanwhile, Ethan walked home under city lights that once felt like his domain. They didn't shine for him anymore. But for the first time, he didn't want them to. Sophia's name began appearing in places she'd only dreamed of. Fashion and luxury lifestyle magazines hailed Elysian Crown as the salon that redefined modern elegance. What started as a refuge became a revolution. Celebrities began booking under aliases just to experience her signature treatments. Sophia wasn't just a stylist anymore, she was a brand. Influencers tagged the salon in posts, beauty editors lined up interviews, and Forbes featured her in an article titled, "The Woman Who Built an Empire from Ashes." But beneath all the glamour, Sophia remained grounded. She still arrived early to sweep the floors. She still brewed her own tea. And when asked in interviews about her success, she never mentioned Ethan. Not once. Her story wasn't defined by betrayal, it was born in resilience. Even Maya, now preparing to launch her skincare line in partnership with the salon, marveled at Sophia's grace. "You didn't just win," she told her one evening, "you rewrote the rules." The partnership with Maya became more than a business decision, it became a symbol of sisterhood. Together, they introduced an exclusive beauty and wellness collection under the name Crown and Root, merging high-end skincare with personalized hair rituals. The line sold out within hours of its pre-launch announcement. Industry insiders called it the future of beauty, and Sophia was invited to sit on panels, speak at conferences, and advise young entrepreneurs. But she turned down most of them. "I didn't build this to become a celebrity," she told Maya. "I built this for the girl who's told she's not enough." Behind the scenes, Isabelle joined as a silent investor, handling expansion into a second location uptown. Lillian, now retired, volunteered at a local women's shelter and often told Sophia, "You've become the woman I prayed you'd never have to become, but I'm proud all the same." The salon became a sanctuary, not just for clients, but for women reclaiming their stories. And Sophia? She became a quiet legend, the one who walked through fire and came out crowned. Ethan watched her from afar, never calling, never writing again. He didn't deserve a front-row seat in her comeback. He knew that now. From time to time, he read her interviews, watched her on TV, saw her walking red carpets, but he never reached out. He understood that she had outgrown the version of love he offered. The same love that once doubted her dreams and sided with deceit. Vanessa had been arrested 2 weeks prior, found in Dubai trying to open a shell company under a new identity. Her fall from grace was swift and merciless. Ethan didn't attend the hearings. He had given his statement and walked away. He spent his time volunteering now, anonymously, at a mentorship program for troubled youth, building something with his hands for the first time in years. But the truth never left him. Sophia's success wasn't revenge, it was rebirth. And some rebirths leave the past buried so deep, there's no door left to knock on. Lucas Evans had always been in Sophia's life, orbiting in moments of chaos as her unlikely protector, but never once stepping over the line. He was her anchor when the storm hit, the man who didn't rescue her, but stood beside her as she rescued herself. Sophia had always admired his fierce loyalty and the way he defended her without seeking applause. But lately, his presence felt different. More intentional. The conversations became longer, layered with subtle affection. He noticed things, like how she always tucked her pen behind her ear when brainstorming, or how she hummed when deep in thought. One night after closing the salon, as they locked up together in the glow of city streetlights, Lucas stopped walking. "You're not the same woman I first met," he said. "And I don't mean that as a compliment, I mean it as a prayer answered." Sophia looked at him, stunned but calm. And for the first time in months, she allowed herself to smile without armor. It wasn't sudden. There were no fireworks, no declarations of undying love. It was slow. Honest. A kind of affection that didn't demand to be seen but made its presence felt in small, consistent ways. Lucas began accompanying Sophia to vendor meetings, offering insights without trying to take control. He helped Maya with logistics for Crown and Root, and always brought Lillian her favorite almond scones on Sunday mornings. He never once spoke ill of Ethan. He didn't need to. His actions said everything. One evening, during a cozy dinner at Lillian's apartment, with soft jazz playing and rain tapping on the windows, Lillian leaned over to Sophia and whispered, "He doesn't fill the silence. He respects it. That's rare." Sophia nodded slowly. She didn't know if she was ready to fall again, but something inside her was healing, and Lucas wasn't rushing it. He was simply showing up, and in a world where many men came with conditions, Lucas came with consistency. The turning point came on a night that felt like a full circle. Sophia was preparing for an industry gala where a Elysian crown was to be honored, and she stood in front of her mirror unsure if she even wanted to go. Lucas, dressed in a tailored suit, walked in holding a single white peony, her favorite. "I'm not here to be seen," he said softly. "I'm here to stand beside you, even if all you need is someone to open the car door and disappear into the background." Sophia's throat tightened. No man had ever offered to stand beside her without trying to outshine her. She took the flower, nodded, and whispered, "Stay." That night, the cameras captured her brilliance, but Lucas's quiet presence just outside the frame meant more than the spotlight. And somewhere between champagne toasts and teary speeches, Sophia realized that her heart hadn't just healed, it had learned how to love again, without losing itself in the process. The new Elysian Crown flagship location opened in the heart of Manhattan on a crisp Sunday morning, just 3 blocks from where Sophia once caught the subway to Velvet Glow Salon with tips in her bag and a dream in her chest. The ribbon-cutting ceremony wasn't a lavish affair, it was intimate, filled with friends, family, and former clients who had watched her rise not from a pedestal, but from the dirt. Lillian stood beside her, tears shimmering in her eyes, as Maya snapped photos while barking orders with proud precision. Isabelle gave a toast, to the woman who taught us all how to rise without stepping on anyone to do it. The applause was thunderous. Sophia looked around, humbled but empowered. The walls of the new salon carried warmth, not marble coldness. Each chair was hand-selected. Each staff member had been personally mentored. This wasn't just a business. It was her legacy. Her sanctuary. Her crown, finally worn on her terms. Later that evening, after the crowd had dispersed and the city had dimmed into twilight, Sophia found herself sitting on the rooftop of the building, legs tucked beneath her, the skyline glittering like a promise. Lucas joined her quietly, bringing 2 glasses of white wine and a silence that didn't need filling. You did it, he said, placing the glass beside her. No, Sophia corrected gently, we did. They clinked glasses and sat beneath the stars, not as two people rushing toward a finish line, but as two souls finally free from the race. The past had tried to shape her, confine her, and punish her. But she had chosen a different ending. She had written one. One where success wasn't bought, where love didn't come with bruises, and where forgiveness didn't mean forgetting, but rising anyway. Lucas took her hand and smiled. Not a new beginning born out of fantasy, but one built on honesty, healing, and hard-won peace. It wasn't a second chance, it was a first one done right. Across town, Ethan packed his final box. The apartment had been sold, the nameplate removed, and the chapter officially closed. As he carried the last of his belongings down the hallway, he passed a mirror. For the first time, he didn't look away. He had lost everything, money, power, legacy, but gained clarity. He mailed Sophia the letter he'd started months ago. No return address. No expectations. Just closure. Vanessa's trial loomed, and he had offered his full cooperation. He would rebuild, but on different soil. Meanwhile, Sophia placed the letter on her desk without opening it. She smiled faintly, then tucked it into a drawer she no longer opened often. That part of her story was finished. The final scene belonged to her now, a woman who had been dismissed, broken, betrayed, and still chose to rise, love, and lead. As the city pulsed around her, she stood before the glass window of her empire and whispered, "This is where I begin." And this time, no one would write her ending for her. The end. Thank you for watching. Please subscribe, like and comment, and also share to your loved ones or anyone who might be interested. Turn on post notification after subscribing so you get informed on our next video. Thank you, and I'd see you next time. Bye for now.